Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley with the Hurricane Outlook and Discussion for November 9th, 2020, recorded on 2 p.m. Eastern Time. While taking a wide look across the tropical Atlantic this afternoon, we have Invest Area 97L, which is located right now to the south and west of the Azore Islands, which is located up in here. And this will be drifting around over the next several days, kind of moving off towards the east and northeast. Not expected to bring much of any land impacts, but this is a broad area associated with this frontal boundary. This is expected to start occluding off and become a subtropical or tropical storm within the next couple of days. We are also watching an area of disturbance out here, which will be designated Invest Area 98L, a part of a frontal boundary. Again, this part will be drifting across into the Caribbean over the next several days and has a 50-50 shot at developing into a tropical depression or storm during the next 5 days. And then, of course, we're watching Tropical Storm Eta, which is now weakened down to about 50 miles per hour. Some additional slight weakening could occur today before all is said and done. But if we take a closer zoomed in look at this here, we can tell that we do have some pockets of deeper convection now firing near the low level center. And again, you can see a lot of just dry, stable air around this whole entire air mass. And again, we have very dry air kind of punching on the back side of this and a semi well protected inner core structure at the moment. This is actually a bit different than what we saw from earlier this afternoon, and especially even last night and early this morning, where the convective core was very shallow. Now we actually have some substantial deep convection rotating around, and the center of circulation is right here. We'll get another recon plane in there later this afternoon, but on the latest passes from recon, you can see a couple of things have happened. We started off with an initial pressure of 993 millibars. That pressure rose almost into the 1,000 millibar range. We went from the low 990s to the high 990s, and then we started dropping back down here on the last pass through. They recorded a pressure of 995 millibars. So this is suggesting that the convection has started to bring the central pressure down again. The storm is going to be hanging here for the next several days. It's not really expected to move much. May dip a little bit more towards the south and then kind of come back towards the north. Now, this turn towards the north is expected by almost all the models at this point. We do expect some slight turn towards the north, but how close it gets to Florida, again, remains the biggest question here, and again, is going to be kind of the determining factor over the next several days or so. Now, there's also another important thing here is the fact of the matter that you can see the wind core here associated with Eta. The wind maximum was very, away from the center. That has actually shrunk now down towards the sustained winds. Of course, being a little bit weaker, but the radius of maximum winds has now decreased, which means a tighter pressure gradient is likely trying to take over, and it's possible that this does even become a hurricane once again at some point in its lifetime. And that is going to be very important because this might allow for further, of course, intensification with a smaller radius of maximum winds. Now, the track forecast, though, is relatively uncertain. We have a high uncertainty factor going into this forecast, and this is why I stress that there's a large degree of uncertainty here with the forecast. So this is the um, cone here from 10 o'clock this morning, the 10 a.m. advisory package. The 1 p.m. intermittent advisories here, but you don't get a track change here. You'll get another update here with the newest track in about 2 hours. But you can see, again, you have this west-southwest motion continuing through tomorrow morning, and then trying to resume by tomorrow night a northerly trajectory. So this is going to be kind of moving very slow and is only expected to be somewhere in the central Gulf of Mexico by Wednesday into Thursday. Now, at this point, this would be far enough away that the center would not bring substantial wind impacts towards the coast here along the Tampa Bay area, where earlier in the week we were thinking that there might have been a more substantial risk for some stronger winds in that vicinity. With that track change, we're not seeing that. But again, the cone of uncertainty, we're just talking about where the center could be. And again, the impacts are extending well away from the center of circulation at this point. Uh, Again, at one point earlier this morning, tropical storm force winds were extending about 310 miles to the northeast of the storm center. So, all the way from basically Key West to Metro Orlando, we were getting some of those tropical storm force winds and gusts, certainly. And we do have a live camera system that is out there right now. And we will be pulling that in here within the next about 3 to 4 hours and capturing some of the incredible video that we got. But again, for the most part, we do have a tropical storm watch for portions of Cuba. Again, this is because this could get close enough to the islands here of Cuba to produce some tropical storm force winds. It's exactly how close it gets is a relatively unknown at this time. This may actually dip a little bit more towards the south and west, and may even dip a little bit towards the south before it starts to kind of move back towards the north. But again, on this current forecast path, this is expected to be making landfall in the Big Bend area of Florida sometime by the weekend. But that is relatively low confidence. Really, this could be anywhere from Louisiana, once again, all the way to portions of southwest Florida. So there's a very huge range of spread within the models, and we'll talk about that here actually starting right this second. So, with regards to the track forecast here, this is the GFS 500 millibar flow in the atmosphere, and this was valid for 1 p.m. this afternoon, so about an hour ago. We can see that the storm right now is embedded within a broader 500 millibar flow, and what this really is a giant upper level low that has kind of consumed the storm. And within that upper level low, you have the tropical cyclone, which is located right in here. Now, a couple of things are occurring because of this. We also have some very strong vertical wind shear occurring because of the pivoting factor, and we also have competing steering flow environments right now. One of which, again, you can see right now, we have this upper level low, and the storm is basically just pivoting and pinwheeling around a secondary low area, which is right here. So the storm is actually kind of diving towards the southwest, and this piece of energy is moving towards the northeast. So we've kind of got a pinwheel. Now, once this is located somewhere within the Florida Keys, the storm is going to stop pinwheeling and start moving back towards the north as it kind of releases, it catches and then releases the tropical cyclone flow. But the problem is we got a very big blocking high out here that is setting up, and this ridge of high pressure is trying to force this directly towards the north. So it's kind of counteracting this broader flow right here. Now, also at the same time, we have another ridge that is trying to build back in over Mexico, and we have a trough, but this trough is come very far back. It's kind of very far back at this moment. And again, you can kind of see the stream flowing from southwest to northeast, so it's kind of oriented from southwest to northeast at this time. Now, if we move this forward, you can see what ends up happening is this piece does end up getting down here towards the Bahamas. So this ends up kind of pivoting around and then starts moving it back towards the north by Wednesday. Now, we have this very big high pressure area out here that is trying to steer the storm generally towards the north. Again, you can see this big area of high pressure that will just kind of highlight out here, trying to push the storm generally towards the north. But then we have a competing steering flow with a broader high pressure region setting up out here that is going to try to push the storm towards the south. So you do have competing steering factors, and you don't have a big jet that's dipping in, except really for this, that's going to try to carry it towards the north and east. Now, by later in the week, you can see that the storm by Thursday here, 1 a.m. Thursday, is trying to pull northward. But what's happening is this trough is not digging in like we first thought. This trough was expected to really dig in down across here. The bottom of the trough was expected to be over the southeast United States, and that was going to pick our storm up and carry it towards the north and east and, kind of scurry it out of here. Now there's signs that this trough is not going to dig in. In fact, if we go back several runs prior, we can see where this was expected to have a much kind of not flatter base, but this was expected to definitely be digging in. And then you were also expected to not have as dominant of a high pressure out here. And we can go all the way back here to kind of previous forecast runs where, again, this was kind of expected to be somewhere in there. So the forecast evolution, you can see, has changed quite significantly. So this is by 72 hours. Now you can see the storm is not as well defined here. This is because we have very dry air and vertical wind shear. Again, the bottom of this trough here is injecting a lot of southwesterly vertical wind shear, and it's also injecting a lot of dry air, which is going to encompass this area, which has already been in the area. It's only going to increase as time goes on and is likely to inhibit the storm from really gaining any significant organization over the next several days or so. And again, you can just kind of see that we're going to be dealing with a very tough steering pattern. Again, anytime we have a very weak steering pattern, the models are going to be all over the place. So, well, the models, we're locking onto a Florida landfall today. They're kind of shifting back westward towards, maybe somewhere in the central Gulf Coast. This is normal for storms that aren't really expected to be moving much, and especially storms that could be weakening. Some models have it strengthening. It really depends on how much vertical wind shear and how much dry air affects this inner core. If the storm manages to build a tougher inner core now, like it is attempting to do so, this might have a shot at becoming stronger initially. But even the mid-level flow is relatively weak. But with the storm expected, stronger storm doing a beta drift that would move it more towards kind of the north and northwest. So this is something that we're going to have to watch because, again, how strong it gets in the short term or how weak it gets in the short term is going to matter a ton down the road. Now, if we compare this forecast to the HWRF, this is the 12Z HWRF forecast. And again, you can see this is valid for 4 o'clock. So in about 2 hours from now, you can see what's expected to happen is this big ridge of high pressure. Again, this is now building over top towards the north and east of the storm system. But again, we have this bottom trough that's digging in here. Now, this is one of the models that brings it a little bit closer to Florida before kind of carrying it elsewhere. Now, you can see the storm does make that dive towards the west-southwest and continues it really until tomorrow. This is one of the things that the model does here that the NHC is not forecasting is continue that dive almost back into closer towards the western tip of Cuba, then ejecting that storm slowly back towards the north and crawling northeastward. And again, this trough is the one responsible for that, but this big ridge dominating out here is trying to steer the storm southward, and this ridge out here is trying to steer the storm northward, and this trough is trying to steer the storm towards the north and east. So there's a ton of competing steering flows, and which one is going to win out, really, we don't know that answer yet. So realistically here on the HWRF, again, by Thursday, this trough is kind of, ejecting across here, but it's moving very slowly. And you can see the jet maximum is very far removed from the bottom of this area. You get this big ridge of high pressure still trying to steer the storm generally towards the north out of this time. But again, this big ridge over here, it's kind of contracting, but it's still there. And the mid-level influence is one that is trying to steer the storm generally towards the south. So if this is a bit stronger, there is the potential that a storm in here could feel more of that tug. And in fact, if we look at a vortex average sounding here for the model in particular on the HWRF, you can see that the steering flows generally in the low levels out of the south here, and generally a mix of steering flows up at the mid and upper levels. But one that is going to generally be favoring kind of a north to northwest movement here. But the steering flow is relatively weak even in the upper levels of the atmosphere. And for that reason, the storm is just going to be hanging around. And then eventually you can see the vorticity ends up just kind of dissipating here by late Thursday as a response of very strong southwesterly vertical wind shear and a lot of dry air. And again, you can also see that this trough is now lifting northward. So this, storm doesn't really have much of a shot to go anywhere. And it's just going to be hanging around Eventually, its low level energy may eventually try to drift semi towards the north here. Again, a much larger trough then comes down here within the next 5 days. So we could be talking about a storm that could be just hanging around here for the next several days or so. But one of the things that I really want to point out is the vertical wind shear that's expected across the storm. Right now, not a lot of shear, but a lot of dry air across the storm. But eventually, you'll see that the storm does manage to develop somewhat of an outflow pool here. But eventually, come Thursday, the storm has a lot of shear to contend with in this right front exit region, diving across here, producing a lot of southwest vertical wind shear, and is just unable to kind of contend with the storm. Now, one of the more important things, also, though, is just because the storm may be offshore and might be actually weaker, does not necessarily mean that Florida is out of the realm of impacts from the storm. We can see if we go back to really 4 p.m. this afternoon, what we're looking at is the 700 to 400 millibar relative humidity. And again, just for quick context here, the dry air is marked in brown, the moist air is labeled in the green. So you can see what's happened here. We've had a broad onshore flow all day across portions of central Florida. This has been bringing rain showers to the area today, and we've also had, again, kind of this wraparound flow coming around the storm across portions of South Florida, still dumping some heavy rainfall in that vicinity, and will be for some time yet. Now, today, again, the inner core has looked a little bit better, so this is kind of a reasonable expectation that there is moisture around that inner core, but it's not much at the moment. And we can very clearly see we have a lot of dry air wrapping around the back side of this upper level low here and is trying to get spinned into the cyclone. And with this dry air that is trying to get nudged in, you're going to have the storm eventually wrap up into this dry air at some point in time. Now, the H wharf does try to mix out some of this dry air by Wednesday, and this is the time where we think maybe some strengthening could occur. On the HMON model, today's 12Z HMON, it was much stronger, showing a potent hurricane in that region. On today's 12Z GFF or HWRF, however, this is showing somewhat of a weaker solution at a maybe at best a modest or strong tropical storm, or maybe even a low grade hurricane. But you can see that this dry air starts to mix out, but again, this very strong increase in southwesterly vertical wind shear is now going to be stretching this vorticity and all of this moisture towards the north. So you can see that while Florida, especially maybe even portions of central Florida, may get a tad bit of a break, South Florida is going to have to contend with days on days of moisture that's going to be rotating in. Again, because the storm isn't necessarily well towards the west or way towards the south, you're going to have this moisture being wrapped around in and around of portions of South Florida. And again, this could mean days and days of training rain bands in some of those areas that have already seen upwards of 12 to 15 inches of rainfall today across portions of South Florida. Now, as this continues, you can also see that again, we have this big ridge, and you can kind of see that denoted by the area of brown here, indicating dry, stable air. But a lot of moisture is getting wrapped around this back side of the ridge here, the front side of the ridge, really, and getting strung out in the vorticity, along with the southwesterly vertical wind shear, killing the storm off. You can see largely by 1 p.m. Thursday, this is kind of a dry vortex at the moment, and everything is towards the north and east. So we're looking really towards a confined storm that, if anything, did end up kind of coming towards the north. Even if it is away from Florida, there will be an increase in moisture, which is going to lead to an increase in rainfall. And certainly for areas that are going to be dealing with rain over the next several days, you don't really need the excess rainfall right now. So again, it is possible, but not entirely likely now. We're starting to kind of see some change towards a non-Florida landfall, but still going to be driving moisture and breezy conditions into that region over the next several days. Now, again, we can see this illustrated another way on the GFS 500 millibar geopotential height, and basically looking at the anomalies. Again, we see this area of low pressure, but notice how big this area is. This is combined with this broader upper level low, and then we have a secondary area right here that is trying to pinwheel around and kind of almost like a Fujiwara effect, kind of driving this a little low towards the north and east. And our storm is trying to dig towards the south and west here, so it's kind of digging around. But by the time, because this area down towards the south is pinwheeling faster around, what's going to happen is eventually it's going to release and the storm is going to try to go northward. But you can see that it has a lot of trouble because this ridge ends up being a very big, potent ridge out here and tries to interlock where you have generally zonal flow towards the north and then a trough way towards the north here, almost at the edge of the screen. And we'll also be watching for something down here, but again, you can also very clearly see that the steering pattern is going to be very tricky. Now, there's also one other scenario that could happen here, and this is illustrated by the NavGem, which is a dynamical model, but the Navy model, but is also forecast by a couple of other models still, including the 0Z GFS parallel. What's going to end up happening, again, this is based on the NavGem model, so it's not necessarily the most accurate, but it does represent something here. We go out to 7 p.m. this evening. Again, represents pretty good a broad upper level low digging in here. And then we can kind of see the storm sitting off the western tip of Cuba. So all the models do agree that this will take a dive towards the south and west, continued through tonight and into tomorrow. And again, you can see even potentially getting as far south here as the western tip of Cuba. And then eventually, as this starts to kind of pinwheel around and then this ridge sets up across here, we get a storm that generally wants to move towards the north. And that's exactly what happens, is that the storm moves northward. But here in particular, what the biggest key is that this trough is actually much quicker and is deeper in towards the southwest United States. And what that does is it cannot produce a ridge. There is no ridge that is able to be produced out here. And thus, the storm now getting carried and swept by this trough is carried towards the north and east across the Florida Peninsula. And that's exactly what happens. This crosses the Florida Peninsula and obviously weakens there after making landfall in the Florida Peninsula. So this is still a possibility. Again, this is the latest 12Z model run. So, this was initialized at 7 a.m. this morning. I believe we did not get any 18 Zulu runs. Actually, we do. So we'll see what the 18 Zulu model run comes out with, and we'll see that if this trend continues or does it flip towards other model solutions out here towards the central Gulf Coast states. Either way, this is going to be a rainfall threat over the next several days, more than likely. Again, we can see here, even in the model, that this would be approaching the Florida Peninsula, bringing with it some heavy rainfall. Either way, once again, we're going to be looking at this for a period of multiple days. And again, this could be a multi-day heavy rainfall event for portions of the Central Florida Peninsula. So something to watch here. But again, not really anything to be concerned about. Of course, stay tuned to the official updates. We'll be, of course, working to get our videos out from today in the Hurricane Camera Project. But other than that, have a great rest of your afternoon, evening. Of course, I am Michael Romali. I'll talk to you guys again some more tomorrow.